Hey, good Wednesday evening, everybody. It's Hump Day here. We are live here at our Live Weather Impact studio talking about another warm, dry day. I think that's been the trend that we've seen recently with very dry conditions. I don't have to be the one to tell you this. If you have a lawn, a garden, or any kind of landscaping, it has been incredibly dry. And the number one request, number one comment that we're getting on most of our weather posts right now, we need rain. So trust me, we know. And tomorrow at this time, I think we're going to dive deeper because we'll have the drought monitor, which comes out every Thursday. I am really curious to see how much the abnormally dry conditions expand and the moderate drought. I'm sure Tim and I will talk about that coming up in a couple minutes. But let's do a highlight of your forecast. If you missed our 6 o'clock news, we'll get right into it. It's been another warm, dry day. You could see some clouds spreading into the region. In fact, let me take a quick look at our quad cam here. We're going to bring up our Mr. Sparky camera network. If you're not familiar with that, we've got a view up in Monroe, Dallas. That looks gorgeous. Charlotte looks beautiful. Lake Norman, a little cloud cover, though. There are some clouds up in that area, so we are seeing a few clouds coming in from the north. I'll show you the satellite and radar again just to show you. Yeah, there are some clouds kind of dropping south, kind of still wrapping around that big low-pressure system that's off the coast of Virginia right now and pushing away. Today, 84 and 62. That is about as normal as it gets for a September 17th because the averages are 83 and 62. So it might have felt warm to you, but this is where we're supposed to be. I tweeted this and posted earlier today. We are having the 16th coolest start to fall in September on record through the first 16 days. So if you think it's been comfortable and kind of crazy cool, it has been. This is the coolest start to autumn since 2017. So 83 is normal for this time of year. So sitting at normal right now, but some areas in the 60s and 70s. The dry air is still in place. This has been an incredibly dry start to September as well. We'll be talking about that with Tim after what has been a crazy, warm, humid summer. The end of it and now early fall has been incredibly dry and cool. Just a complete flip or 180 from what we had for most of this summer. We're going to be talking about Ivan and Francis today because there's an anniversary. So I'm going to show you that map real quickly because Ivan actually affected us on this date back in 2004. But just like most of the historical storms we've been talking about with flooding, it's always a double storm, some kind of double rainfall event, which we'll get into a little bit more with Tim. But I wanted to quickly show you that as we lead off because that was a big anniversary today as well. Lows tonight for everybody out late tonight, early tomorrow morning. Temperatures will be in the low 60s to upper 50s. Tomorrow, definitely getting a little warmer, 87. That'd be the warmest we've seen since last weekend or the weekend before, actually, when it was 89. So
feels like every one of those weekends keeps trying to flirt with 90.
The weekends are getting close. We have hit 90, by the way, since August 18th in Charlotte. I think Tim will tell you it's been August 17th for them. So it's been a whole month since we've seen 90. And that would be one of the earliest last 90-degree days if it holds, which it probably won't. It'll probably be one of those weird things. We jump up to 90 briefly. Notice our surface map. A few sprinkles showing up there. I'm actually somewhat optimistic we might see a few showers on Saturday. Dew points stay dry, but there's a hint next week they could surge. Now, while that's not comfortable, I don't want to see high humidity or dew points. That could mean also a better chance of scattered storms next week that we'll talk about. So the rain chances do go up to 40%. Whew. Seems like that's the highest they've been in a while for Saturday. And the rainfall overall, though, it looks minimal. This is our long-range 7-day accumulation. So the amounts aren't great, so don't get too excited. If it rains, it's going to be incredibly light. We'll talk about this with Tim as well. The tropics are heating up. Gabrielle is a very lopsided storm. It is not very symmetric. All the storms are being shoved off to the northeast. It's got dry air around it, so it's not real healthy. But it will get into a better environment in the coming days, and it's likely going to be a fish storm. A fish storm is a name we give jokingly but seriously to storms that don't affect land because they only affect fish. But this one could have an impact on Bermuda. So if you happen to be watching this stream in Bermuda, pay attention to this because Gabrielle could be an issue long term for you. And just to show you the model tracks, this is going to be zero impact to the Carolinas. I say zero because even the swells look minimal from this distance. Probably the one indirect impact might be rip currents, so something to keep an eye on if you have a late trip planned to the coast this weekend. Speaking of the tropics, they are heating up. We've got 2 more tropical waves, which don't have a high chance of development right now, but 20% this far out tells you that something could get going there. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a system or 2 develop here in the coming days off the coast of Africa or in the Atlantic because conditions are getting more favorable. Let's take a quick look at the weekend forecast. Saturday, we've got a 40% chance of scattered storms. Not everyone's going to see rain, but I think some people will. And unfortunately, the only chance of rain that we've had in the last couple of weeks is going to be on a Saturday, which probably is going to ruin some people's outdoor plans. But at this point, beggars can't be choosers. We just got to get the rain when we can. So just give yourself a heads up that if you have outdoor plans on Saturday, you might see some lightning strikes, which is really what I'm more concerned about than the rain. The rain is not a big deal. Lightning is. Your Jerry Hunt Supercenter 7-day forecast, that does not look like a September forecast. Notice our average high right now is 83. The average low is 62. Pretty much every day here is above normal, and you're saying, well, at the end of the week it looks, or end of the 7-day it looks cooler. Remember, the average high is going down. By the end of the month, I'll show you the 10-day forecast, the average high drops to 78 degrees. Ooh. So highs in the 80s this late into September, that is above normal, warmer than average. Rain chances still pretty minimal. 40% Saturday, maybe the following Saturday. What is it with the weekends? I mean, when we do get rain, it seems to be on the weekend. So unfortunately, it looks like we could have a couple chances of rain there. But remember, this is a long-range forecast. A lot of things will change in the next 10 days. We're pretty good at forecasting temperature trends far out. Specific rain chances, not so good. I always tell people don't cancel or change plans beyond day 7 because of a rain chance on our forecast, let alone an app forecast, because that is highly subject to change, and it likely will. So hopefully we'll see some better rain chances as we get into the next week. Coming up after the break, we've got a lot to talk about. We've got a special long show tonight. It's going to be an hour-long show, so we'll have time to talk about the anniversary of Ivan, Francis, dew points, a lot of stuff coming up with Tim Buckley in just a couple minutes. All right, welcome back. Tim Buckley joins me. James Ryerson joins us as well. We got I jokingly called it the trident of weather right now. We've got the triple box going here.
I was going to say three-headed monster.
Yeah, I don't know. What was the three-headed monster from Godzilla?
I have no idea.
Oh, I love that. I love Godzilla.
I'm thinking of the three-headed dog from Harry Potter is another
Yes.
one.
Ooh. What was that name?
I don't know. I
Oh
just
my
read this
gosh.
book with my son.
I think they called him like
What's the three-headed?
Tuffy or something. I don't know what they
Oh,
call
I
him.
can't remember. Now, yeah, see.
All right, just text us.
Google it.
Yeah, just text us.
those in. Yeah, if you know either of those. But yeah, so all three of us join us tonight. We got a special hour-long show tonight, Tim. We're going to get into Helene first here before we get into some other subject matter because you flagged us. We think a lot. You flagged this the exact same time I did. Where was Helene in its evolution 1 year ago today? And you know, we show these quite a bit, Tim, on air, and you can see these on the National Hurricane Center's website, the 7-day tropical outlooks, and they do have an archive there if you ever want to look back. But on this date 1 year ago, this was the 7:23 p.m. Eastern Time update. We got our first 20% chance of tropical development near the Yucatan Peninsula, the Cayman Islands, Jamaica, and Cuba on this date a year ago. And that would eventually become Helene. When I posted this, Tim, I had a lot of viewers who had forgotten that Helene formed this close to us. They had just assumed that it formed out in the middle of the Atlantic somewhere. But what are your memories about this first hints? And this is 10 days before the storm hit us, by the way. 10 days later, this would be Helene impacting the Carolinas. What are your memories of this time 1 year ago today?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Brad. You know, as you know, we get a lot of these 20% blobs that happen quite often. So I don't really have much of any memory at this stage in the game other than just kind of, you know, we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
I don't know that we had much indication 10 days out that it might curve and move the way that it did. But the viewers are right to point out, like, this was not a homegrown system, not really. But once you get toward the end of hurricane season, or the back half anyway, these ones that form closer to North America, the Caribbean, the Gulf, they tend to get a little bit more common. So that's something we will want to watch out for over the next, I think, couple of weeks. Just climatologically, that's kind of a more favored spot. And Helene was one of those that when it forms a little closer like that, you don't have quite as much time. Yeah. And Helene, you know, not to get ahead of ourselves, we'll talk more about this over the next week, but it really ballooned up really fast in the Gulf, getting very strong very quickly, several days down the road from this initial outlook.
Yeah, and you know, Tim, you bring up a great point because we've had a similar lull. It's kind of offset a little bit, but last year people forget we had a late August, early September lull in the tropics as well, where nothing formed for about 3 weeks. This year it's a little bit later. It's kind of pushed back into September. But then all of a sudden, about this time last year, everything started going gangbusters in the Atlantic. And what worries me is this year, we haven't had much in the Gulf. The water down there is super warm. It's been untouched by storms. And like what happened last year, we had Helene, and then remember Milton blew up as well down there and headed towards Florida. But there's a lot of untapped heat content in the Gulf right now. And so I think it's a good idea for people not to let their guard down, even though we've had this incredible lull, which kind of got broken a little bit today with Gabrielle, but Gabrielle's really not going to be a threat, and it's kind of a really, you know, like sheared system right now. It doesn't look all that great out there, Tim, but we still got a ways to go. There's Gabrielle. Thanks to Tim for the graphic there. But yeah, you were mentioning too that the storm is not really good looking on satellite. The low level center is what we call naked. It's nothing dirty. It just means that the center is exposed or kind of nowhere near where the thunderstorms are. But if it does get north, it does get into a better environment, Tim. And unlike Aaron, this doesn't look like it's going to generate gigantic swells or even that bad of a rip current, but it's something to keep an eye on for rip currents on the East Coast if it does get a little bigger near Bermuda.
Yeah, probably two reasons for that it wouldn't be as big of an impact as number one is farther away. But even still, the ones that are far away can have some impact. But this one, it just should be a lot weaker.
Yeah.
Remember how strong Aaron was for so many days? I mean, when you're a Cat 4, Cat 5, something or other, you're pushing all that energy for a long time. Momentum is a real thing. It doesn't look like this one is going to have all that much momentum with it. So, we're not making fun of Gabrielle here, but it's just not the most impressive of systems.
Yeah.
But if we want to show our work a little bit, here are all these little spaghettis. Whenever we show this to you, every one of those is a different computer model idea of where the storm might go. And that's a pretty darn good consensus over a 7-day period that we have a trend that it should curve away from us. And, part of that reason is we should have some troughing. Over the East Coast, there should be some winds that, gets closer, blows it away. Sometimes people joke about, pointing their hair dryers toward the Atlantic. Well, we can do that with the jet stream or something too, and it looks to be the case as we go into this time.
Yeah, Gabrielle looks like a no-show for us, no big deal. But before we kind of move on to our next subject matter, which we'll talk about another anniversary today, I want to still focus on Helene because I'm going over the next 10 days, Tim. We will be revisiting a lot of what was happening at the time. And again, for folks out there, we know the folks in Western North Carolina, honestly, I would tell you, even myself, there's still some anxiety and, some sorrow about what happened. We're not going to dive into a lot of, the imagery. But I think it's important, Tim, that we look back at what happened so that we learn, and we also talk about the recovery. And one of the areas that's trying to recover that was really heavily devastated was the Lake Lure area. It's one of my favorite locations. I spent a lot of time over there before the storm, after the storm. And we got an update today. I think the EPA was over there touring the Lake Lure area. And our Miles Harris has got a story about some of the recovery efforts going on in the Lake Lure area.
Throughout Lake Lure, the scars of Hurricane Helene are still visible, but officials say their focus now is about how far this community has come and how they're preparing for the future.
Lake Lure Dam was constructed in
EPA Regional Administrator Kevin McAlmbert joined local leaders at landmarks in western North Carolina, including the Lake Lure Dam at Morse Park. Together, they marked 1 year since the storm, highlighting recovery efforts already accomplished and the work still underway.
We are doing a lot and have done a lot to try to help with the situation, and we're going to continue to do what we can to help.
From restoring critical infrastructure to reopening public spaces, officials say progress is steady, but they also acknowledge rebuilding will take time and funding.
The damages that were incurred due to the storm have exacerbated all needs for our infrastructure, so especially our sewer and dam. So, we're working each day to try to find funding and working with our engineers that y'all heard from today to continue moving forward to try to replace those systems and be where we need to be.
While the EPA has shown support allocating millions through the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, recovery efforts to areas like Lake Lure could take months and even years, where continued funds are needed to ensure long-term sustainability. Now, officials say that funding will continue in the months ahead, and at 6 o'clock tonight we will dive deeper into why that funding is so important for this community. In Lake Lure, Miles Harris, WCNC Charlotte.
Yeah, the Lake Lure, Chimney Rock, Bat Cave area, that is a very popular tourist area. It was really heavily hit. The Hickory Nut Gorge is the gorge which runs by Chimney Rock, and it's a geologic fascination of mine because when you see this, it's such a sharp canyon. You know that water eventually had to cause that canyon to form. But what's happened is all that debris got pushed into Lake Lure, Tim, and it's really a monumental task. When we were over there initially, that was when all that debris was floating on the surface. The Army Corps of Engineers, they've done a minor miracle. They removed all the surface debris, and now, as you saw in some of those images, the lake, I think, is about 50 feet below full pond, if I'm not mistaken.
We were looking at it yesterday.
Yeah, it's like 30 or 50 feet below full pond, so it doesn't even look like a lake, and so many areas are dry. They were dredging out all the sediment that's in there. And one of the things I thought was interesting, Tim, was there was so much sediment and debris at the mouth of the river and the lake where it flows in that the water wasn't flowing correctly into the lake, and they really had to clean that out so that they could actually let the water get back in there. But it's going to be an interesting process because the timeline they gave us, James, I remember, I think at the end of October, their goal is to start allowing it to refill. It's only going to fill like a foot a week, and by March, I think they want to have it high enough for the local crew teams, the rowing teams, to be able to practice, and then by the end of May, going into summer, open it to the public. So think about that process. It's been a year since the storm, and it's still not recovered, and it could be another half year,
A year
9
and a
months.
half, maybe, by the time we're all done. I know we talked to the Army Corps in December as they were doing the Christmas Village down there at Lake Lure, and they were still pulling like huge trees out of the water. And this was before they found even more cars buried down there, because once they got all that water out, they were finding, they find like a Model T or something, right? Something that
Yeah, a lot of
hadn't seen.
historical stuff in there.
Yeah.
This is the lowest the lake has been since it was formed. To tell you, kind of put this in perspective, it had never been this low. The last time it was this low is when they actually put the dam and created the lake. So it's, I'm really fascinated by that area just because of all this process. But the one thing that James said, I wish Miles would have figured out. So they're like 50 feet below, right? Where are all the fish? Are they all in the middle? Like, I'm kind of curious what all the fish are doing. And if you could get to that water, that would be some great fishing right now, because they're all kind of clustered in that area. Because it is a great fishing lake, by the way. I have a lot of friends that fish over there.
Well, it's kind of amazing. I mean, like you were saying, with all the engineering that has to be going on, a lot of times we think about engineering structures and, things like a dam or a road or infrastructure. But in some cases here, you're actually having to re-engineer like the actual physical rivers and lakes and streams and the landscape, which aren't the way that they were before. And so that's just a whole different undertaking completely. And thinking back to like the event itself when Helene was happening, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but there were those urgent messages about the Lake Lure Dam in imminent failure, right? And we got this for a couple of different dams, and I don't believe that any of them actually really did fail per se, but there was that real fear and real danger at that moment that the level of the disaster already could have been even worse if it had totally failed.
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up, because Brittany Van Voorhees, my coworker, she talked to Tricia Palmer, who's the warning coordinating meteorologist down at GSP, and they were talking about how traumatic that whole event was, where they had to put out the warning that there was an imminent dam failure, and if that dam would have failed, that would have been catastrophic. And what was interesting is after the fact, when I went over there, Tim, and I kind of found out the reason they thought the dam was failing was there was erosion on the bank next to the dam. The road had actually collapsed, and so because it was full of water and debris, they couldn't really see the dam, so they just assumed that maybe this meant that the dam was undermined and was going to fail. But what happened was really interesting. When the water did go down, the Corps of Engineers went and inspected it, and they said the dam is in perfect shape. They were stunned how sturdy and well built that dam was. There was really no threat of an imminent failure. It was just some erosion on a bank that had no integrity to do with the dam. So, but the folks at GSP and the local emergency managers, that was a very traumatic event, because they thought they were going to have huge fatalities and destruction. Because remember, at the time, communication was poor. There was no cell service in the Lake Lure area, so getting the warnings out to those people was next to impossible. That's actually some of my drone footage I took. I think this was the week after.
Yeah, I just pulled up your Facebook page.
Which is crazy to look at that. That's when there was actually water in the lake, but there was still tons of debris. A lot of it had sunk at this time. You see these big mats. These coves is where a lot of the debris kind of settled down in there. And you see it's lower there. Look at the tree damage. A lot of the docks and the houses were damaged. They had put up like a little barrier to stop some of the debris from going into the dam. And at the time I was over there, this part's really telling. So I flew over the dam, and you could see they were doing a lot of work below the dam to remove debris. So look at all that debris that's below the dam.
There's the washout.
Yeah, that was the washout right there. That's where they thought there was an issue. But if you look down there, they have backhoes and everything else, bulldozers. They were clearing out big areas of rocks. So yeah, that area on the right, that was the road that got eroded. They thought that was a failure that was going to happen, but all in all, it ended up being just fine.
That's where they had the news conference today with Miles. They stood in that spot.
They were fixing it at the time I was there.
You could see how it almost could have gone right around it.
Yeah, and I think that was a concern at the time. So
I remember, because internally
Yeah.
we talked to the National Weather Service as a broadcast partner, and then there's also emergency management in this chat program. And I remember the emergency manager came into the chat room in all caps, and this isn't a place where you throw around all caps for fun. And he or she wrote like Lake Lure Dam breach imminent.
Imminent,
And
yeah.
the National Weather Service, in their very professional, calm manner, just writes back, "Let me give you a call."
Yeah.
And they took whatever conversation they needed to have about warnings and evacuations briefly out of the chat, where I think you and me and everyone else is leaning at the edge of their chair like, what is happening here?
Yeah, and Lake Lure's in a unique spot. It's technically in Polk County, but it's kind of bordering Rutherford County. So there's a couple jurisdictions, but Polk County normally, I think that was the Polk County Emergency Manager that was in there doing that. And a lot of it was justified, because it's probably better to just say, hey, we could have a failure, than to say,
Sure.
that, we're not going to, instead of just taking a chance there. But below there, this is the Rocky Broad River is the name of the river there. There was still tons of flooding south of the dam. This is footage I took south of the dam, and this is without the breach. And the whole time I'm flying and going there, I'm thinking, man, look at all the water damage they had. There was a church. It was Lake Lure Baptist Church. They had water come up to their first floor just from water going through the spillway, not breach or anything. I was just like stunned, like what if the dam had breached and how much more damage there had been? Because that's the kind of damage we saw below the dam that had nothing to do with water coming out. That was a road that was completely eroded. Spent a lot of time at Lake Lure Baptist. They were actually doing a great job. They withstood damage, but they were taking supplies and distributing them to their congregation. The churches, I can't say enough about the churches over there, because the one thing about churches, they know all their people and they know where everybody lives, and they were like a great resource to get stuff to, and then they could distribute it to everybody across the region. Plus, they were great because they had showers and water and a generator, so people could come there and bathe and kind of have a little semblance of normalcy as they were trying to get mud and stuff out of their houses. So it does bring back a lot of memories just thinking about this a year later, Tim.
Yeah, for sure. And, the fact that we're still doing updates and reopenings and all these things a year later. And I remember not too long ago, we were doing the Chimney Rock update there of, a temporary road, but the main road's going to take maybe another 2-ish years to complete. I mean, this is long-term stuff to kind of, normal is still a ways away for all these people.
As we've been talking, one of the memories that came back to me is a year ago tomorrow, Brad, we did a primetime special here at WCNC just dedicated to the average peak of the hurricane season.
Yeah.
And in that broadcast, and I'm trying to scrub to it right now, Brittany Van Voorhees, who you mentioned earlier, does a tropical update. And just like you showed on the screen here from the Hurricane Center, we can see Brittany pointing to what will be Helene for the first time. I had it marked and then the page refreshed, and now I've lost
Figures.
it. Okay, here it is. So you can just see Brittany in this broadcast talking about that 20% chance of development. It's just behind her there. But the other thing that was coming back to me was, do you remember we almost had Helene by name like a week earlier? Because as Brittany will go on here to show, we had a near tropical system or a potential tropical system right there near Wilmington, dropping all of that tropical moisture. We almost had that system named Helene. Was that potential tropical system 8?
It was a PTC, but it never got a name. And it was so similar to this last little low pressure system that was on our coast that actually flooded parts of the Norfolk area in Virginia. Very eerie to see that kind of same setup that we had about a year ago. But yeah, we thought that was going to be Helene, and it actually had a cone. It was potential tropical cyclone 8, I think it was.
I think so, which would have made Helene
PTC 8.
Isaac.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't have changed what the weather did.
Yeah.
It just would have changed the name.
Yeah, but it is weird to think back about that time.
And don't forget either, it was so bad in Carolina Beach and in Southport, 2 small towns, just small little areas. My parents live there, so I know all about this. Horrible. I mean, they had feet of water in businesses. The whole Main Street of sorts was really messed up in Carolina Beach. Highways in Southport area still just reopened, a couple months ago in some spots. So there were big problems out that way. And you had a 20-inch rain event and then a 30-inch rain event in North Carolina within about, a 14-day period.
I remember talking to Corey Davis from the North Carolina Climate Office, and I think he said we had, just like you said, Tim, we had 2 of these 1,000-year rain events, like within a week or 2 of each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, I'd forgotten that was a PTC. I remember that rain event, but now that you said that, I remember that was going to be potentially Helene. ended up not being one, which is a really good example of like these storms. We sometimes get caught up in labels, Tim, and we heard this a lot when I was at the weather conference a couple weeks ago. People don't like upgrade or downgrade as a term because it's all about the impacts. And we focus on the impacts a lot here at both of our stations. And this is a prime example of just focusing on the impacts and not what it's called, because it was going to flood regardless if it was PTC, Helene, a stalled front, a slow-moving thunderstorm. The impacts were going to be all the same. And that's a great graphic that kind of shows you those events that were a week apart and on both the coast and in the western part of the state. And this is a couple days out. We're starting to see the trough of low pressure that's coming down, and we're talking about those rain chances with the predecessor rain event, which starts to about 4 or 5 days out becomes a little clear that we're going to see some kind of pre-event. And then it becomes really clear 3 to 4 days out that we have, this predecessor rain event. So I think every day over the next, week, we're going to be talking more about this. And it is kind of important to look back at this. And I think the importance of looking back, people will, on social media sometimes can be a crazy place when we talk about this stuff. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to talk about it. It's important because the way that people prepare for future events, Tim, is because they remember these older events. And we talked a lot about this Helene. The reason so many people did not really understand or grasp how bad Helene was going to be, because they didn't remember the 1916 flood, and who would have? They weren't alive. The 1940 flood, or one of the anniversaries we have today is Ivan, which happened in 2004, which is still a pretty long time ago for many folks. But looking back at that event, Tim, it has a similar calling card to these other big flood events in the Western Carolinas, where there was 2 events. It wasn't just the storm, it was a pre-event like we had with Helene, or with these previous floods in 16 and 40 and Ivan, we had back-to-back tropical systems. Ivan was the anniversary today, but people forget a week and a half earlier, Francis, the remnants of Francis hit Western North Carolina. And I actually have a map of the 2 tracks.
Can I pause you for a second and give you a second to pull up all those maps so I would take a 2-minute timeout?
Yes, we'll take a 2-minute timeout. We'll pull that. And we'll talk about how Ivan hit on this date and caused similar flooding in landslides. In some areas, it was the flood of record before Helene, especially around areas of Asheville, which we'll talk about coming up after the break. Thanks for reminding me about that, James.
It's like my one job.
Yes.
But you have to hit the button.
Yes, I will hit it. All right, welcome back. You're looking at a live picture from our Charlotte Motor Speedway camera, which, by the way, just came back online. A little internet issue. You see a lot of people out there, and so if you're wondering what's going on, this is the Bump and Run 5K. This is a cool event. They actually get to run on part of the Roval for this event. So you see all the runners going around. They got a stage set up. They've got tables. This is a big part of the charity events they do out at the Speedway. And again, this is happening right now. It started at 7 o'clock, so they got right on time. There's a post-race concert with Jonathan Traylor out there at the Speedway. So this is the MRO Bump and Run 5K on the Roval. And a lot of runners out there. They're enjoying that.
What a beautiful night for running.
Yeah, I'm going to have to run this one year. I love running. I love the Around the Crown 10K where they shut the interstate down and we get to run on. There's one out at the airport where they shut down the runways and you get to run on the runways.
The runway one.
That one's pretty cool, but this is actually a pretty unique one. You get the run on the Roval, which, by the way, is coming up at the beginning of October. Always fun to be out there. If you like a road race, there, they actually got the logo up there. There's the Bump and Run 5K at the Roval. The Roval's a great race. If you love NASCAR and you've never been to a road course, you usually got to pick a corner, and you only get to see the cars when they come through that corner. But this is a road race where you can see the whole course from the stand, so it's kind of a unique thing where it's a road course and an oval. That's why it's called the Roval. So if you get a chance, it's a great race out there at the Speedway. Thanks to all our friends out at the Speedway. They do a great job out there. So who's winning? Do they have a pace car?
There's some people roller skating.
Oh, wow. There's plenty on a bike. Now, those guys right there, they're hauling. That's a cross-country team right there. Look at that.
I know. There's the real serious runners are up front.
Yeah.
This is my favorite video game, by the way, just moving our cameras around. A shout-out to our engineering team who got this camera back online today so we could bring you these images and other images.
This guy, that's probably got to be... That's a pretty good pace right there.
Tim, you tell us all the time how you start your mornings by going to the park and things. Do you run or?
Yes. Slow and steady walking. It's just as good as running, just not as fast.
Yes. It's good to clear your mind. I'm a big fan of the walks or runs before work. They definitely clear the mind.
I would definitely be one of these people.
I'm loving this. I'm loving this word Roval, though. To me, that's a new one.
Yeah, so it's road course plus oval.
A nice little combo.
They call it the Roval. Yeah, it is a great race. They do a great job out there, and that looks like a cool event actually.
And it's right down there in the infield.
Yeah, so they're coming out right around the front stretch, and looks like they're running the whole Roval, which is kind of cool. That's got to be fun. I'm a big fan of that.
I'm told there's going to be fireworks later, so stick with us here on Live Impact because we might bring you fireworks later.
So it sounds like they are going to finish on the finish line, which is even cooler. Yeah, you're right. They allow walkers, runners, ruckers, which is backpacking it, skaters, strollers, and hand cycles. So
why would I need to backpack it?
Well, some people, get the weighted vest. I got one of those. You try those weighted vests, people. Get you walking around those neighborhoods. But no, it's like, if you put the back on, if you go hiking, a lot of people will train with weighted packs so they can get ready for a hike. And so that's always kind of a cool thing. So yeah, you're looking at live pictures out there. Gorgeous evening out there tonight as we take a look at our Speedway camera.
This is Live Weather Impact Overtime Extended Edition, and we're just going to do commentary of this 5K.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we should have play-by-play. We're doing play-by-play, these guys. No, I'm impressed with the people in the front. They're hauling. Man, if I could do that in 25 minutes, I'd be happy. They're probably going to be
trying to find the lead.
Some 16 or 18-minute 5Ks coming in here. I will tell you, I was able to actually go with Ty Gibbs in a Toyota. I can't remember what it was. It was off the lot. He took me on the Roval, and it was crazy how fast we drove. But also, didn't realize how many hills and bumps there were in the Roval. There's sections where, because you're so low to the ground, you can't see over the hump in the road. And I was really impressed with the way they drove on there. So yeah, that's a look at the Roval right now as they're running the Bump and Run 5K out there. They're going to come back around, then they're going to go around the whole oval part. So they're still in the road course here. They're going to come back out here.
Yeah, they're coming into turn one, Brad.
Yeah, this is well, there's a lot of turns in the Roval, but yeah, this is typically turn one for the oval race.
Is he wearing polka dotted shorts?
Yeah, you don't want to go over those rumples, those little strips there. There's a chicane in the back, so I wonder if they're going to run right through that and not go through that. That's going to be interesting. So the guys in the bikes pacing, those guys are hauling. They're doing pretty good.
All right, we'll check back in on this
Yeah,
later.
we'll see where they go. We'll see who finishes there and their times are. But yeah, getting back to today's anniversary, we were talking a little bit about Ivan. And, what's interesting about Ivan, I remember a lot of things about Ivan. Obviously, I was working in Charlotte, but a year later, Katrina happened. And we talked about Katrina earlier. And Tim, one of the connections to Ivan and Katrina is, so Ivan happened in 2004. Katrina happened in 2005. And part of the social, I want to say, communication issues with Katrina was Ivan initially looked like it was going to make landfall in southeastern Louisiana near New Orleans. And everyone evacuated New Orleans in 2004. And at the last minute, I wouldn't say last minute, but the days leading up, Ivan shifted east towards like Gulf Shores, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle. And because of that, a lot of people did not take Katrina as serious the next year because they thought it would do another Ivan. It would shift off to the east and miss them. So there are some connections with Ivan and Katrina, and actually caused some evacuation hesitancy, if you will, because of what happened with Ivan. But for us in the Carolinas, we remember Ivan because it caused devastating flooding in western North Carolina. In fact, the Swannanoa River area and the French Broad River and areas around the Biltmore Village had extensive flooding, the worst flooding they had seen since 1916, up until Helene. There were landslides. In fact, Interstate 40 was shut down at one point because of a landslide near the Pigeon River, the same area that collapsed. Now, the whole road didn't collapse, but there was a debris flow onto the interstate. And what made this storm unique, Tim, was that it happened with about, I think, 15 to 20 inches of rain, but a week and a half earlier we had the remnants of Francis come through, which dumped about 8 to 10 inches of rain. So these back-to-back events, Tim, always seem to have these really dire consequences in the Carolinas. It's not always the one storm, it's sometimes the back-to-back events, which are like force multipliers for weather. They kind of make the next event worse.
Yeah, and we just talked about this yesterday, right, with Floyd, how you had Hurricane Dennis and then Hurricane Floyd kind of on the heels. It takes a while for the water table to recover, from something like that. Even if you have a week or so in between, that's not quite enough. But you can see I love these hand-drawn maps that we get from Raleigh for big events every now and then, but both of these have huge rainfall impacts. And what also it shows you, and the tendency with Helene was to say, well, gosh, I don't think about hurricanes with the mountains. Well, you should. They do happen over there, and here's proof of it. It's not that long ago. I guess 20 years is a while now, but it doesn't seem like that long ago. But you can see the event has elevation component to it. It's not that the mountains got hit with a different storm per se. Maybe the track was a little bit west, but mountains make the rain heavier. That's just the fact. Like when you're rising all of that air, tropical air, humid air, when you're bringing it up a mountain, you're squeezing out every last drop possible, and you're making heavy rain a whole lot heavier. And that's kind of why it's so dangerous out there. And then when the water's falling on the ground, well, you have natural hazards like landslides that you don't have to worry about a landslide in Charlotte. It's not really the same idea. So they're very dangerous out that way, and they are a part of our state's climate. Whether we think about it as much or not is another story. But this is proof that, it's happened before, and it happened again last year, just in a much worse way with Helene.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the landslide part of it because Brittany and I were on a virtual webinar. It was actually a 3-day conference, the landslide conference in Asheville. We did it virtually, and one of the things that I found interesting from all of the research they did, they went and talked to victims of Helene, and there was this disassociation of flooding and landslides. People didn't realize if it was going to flood that there could be landslides as well, but there's a really close correlation to the two. Almost all big landslide events in the western part of the state coincide with heavy rainfall events. And part of it is just the geology and geography, topography of our mountains. There's a shallow layer of topsoil. There's still clay and rock underneath there. And I know you've got this great graphic, Tim, that kind of shows how these landslides happen. But when that top layer gets saturated, it's kind of like avalanches out west. When you get this loaded up snow on the surface and a weak layer below it, the slope gives way. And this is what causes a lot of the landslides in the Carolinas. So these events that cause heavy rain end up causing landslides and mudslides as well. And I think it's something that hopefully viewers and listeners and watchers now kind of understand. When there's going to be heavy rain in the mountains, you should assume that there's going to be some threat of landslides. And I think the Weather Service did a really good job pre-Helene talking a lot about the landslide risk. But it had been a while since we'd had one of these. And that seems to be another underlying theme, Tim, is that the gap between these big events tends to like let people's guard down, if you will. Where they forget that these things can happen and they get optimism bias, and it ends up that they're not as prepared, or they just don't take them as seriously as they should.
Yeah, your memory can work both in good ways or in bad ways. If we were to get another bad storm that was coming up, God forbid, this year or next year, people are going to remember what happened with Helene, and they would probably take it very, very seriously, I'm sure. But like you said, on the flip side of things, down in New Orleans, the memory worked against them. Yep. I remember up in the Northeast, for example, we all remember Hurricane Sandy. It was devastating and horrific, really. Big problem with the people in New Jersey. They had big issues or big alarm bells going off the year before with Hurricane Irene.
Yeah.
And Irene was really, really hyped up in a big way and was supposed to be a bad storm. And in many cases, it wasn't quite as bad as people had feared or worried about. Not there. Ironically, it was worse up in the New England mountains, the Catskills, and places like Vermont, too. But when Sandy came in, they said, well, I stayed here I left maybe for Irene. I don't want to leave for this one. It wasn't that bad. And you saw exactly what happened that time. And it was horrible, the worst storm of their lifetimes. So memories can be good. They can also be bad. It's important to kind of take each storm as it comes, I think, because you never quite know what you're in for in that case.
Yeah. James, bring up my my graphics because I want to show you the track. One of the other things that was really interesting about Ivan, and I remember this at the time, so I'm going to grab my cursor here so hopefully I can actually point to something. So just so you guys know, this first track right here, this darker pink, this was the remnants of Francis. It came up here. But this track is Ivan. So notice it was going towards New Orleans, and it took that right turn. It went up through eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, went up through Virginia, and then it reemerged into the Atlantic. It drifted south as like a remnant low, passed over Florida, actually caused some flooding in South Florida. Now, at this time, it was not being tracked by the Hurricane Center. It was just a remnant low. But when it got back into the Gulf, right about here, the Hurricane Center reinitialized advisories for Ivan, Part 2, they kind of jokingly called it, and it became a tropical storm and made another landfall in Houston. So think about this storm. Wow. I mean, it did a giant loop-de-loop and came back and hit Houston after like 10 days.
And because it was the same low,
they were
renamed
able.
It Ivan.
So the Hurricane Center is very, very picky about this. If it's a trackable feature from a previous tropical system, which means you can track it as a low pressure system, they will keep the name. We talk a lot about this, storms that pass over Central America or Mexico and reemerge in the Pacific or vice versa. As long as it's a trackable entity, they will keep the name. If it's not, it gets a new name. But it was an odd storm. I mean, it just came up and did that recurvature. But those tracks kind of show you, and James has got the rainfall map from Ivan. So this kind of shows you that yellow line is the track. It's dropped 7 inches of rain in Florida when it came back south, and then another 7 inches of rain in East Texas. Just a wild system. Look at the dates there, the 13th through the 26th. Just crazy. Man, Crusoe, North Carolina, that's an area, was it Fred?
Mm-hmm.
That's where we had the fatalities with Fred making landfall, the campground, when there was a flash flood. Very, an area that was hit again. There's a recurring theme here, Tim. We're seeing, especially with these storm tracks either just to the west or in eastern Tennessee, and back to back, where the same areas are getting hit repeatedly from these events. It just seems like there's big gaps in time between these events, which for our job, I will tell this to anybody who asks what's the harder part of our job. I mean, yeah, forecasting is difficult, but in this day and age, I would swear that it's the communication of the forecast is by far the hardest part. And this is a great example of still to this day, we have really good forecasts. Helene, by the way, was one of the most well forecast tropical systems of all of last season, and we still had trouble communicating how impactful it was going to be, Tim. And that's why we tell these stories a year later. I had someone on my Facebook page saying, why are we talking about historical storms? It must be a quiet season. I said, no, it's important for people to remember that these things happen so that when there's another storm, they take it more seriously.
Yeah, and it's good to know the risk for where you live, right? Because there are a lot of new residents. You can drive anywhere up and down the mountains. There's a lot of new construction. Anywhere in North Carolina, anywhere in the Carolinas, there's a lot of new people, particularly in hurricane-prone areas. And anywhere in North Carolina is prone to some tropical impact. And it's a good thing to educate yourself on when you move to a new area. You might not realize what kind of risk you have. And I guarantee you there are a lot of people in Helene that didn't know that these things are possible up there. And yes, the worst one was probably 1916, but just looking back 20 years, that's not that long ago, and boy, was it bad. It's always interesting to see that map, too, that you just showed. There's two maximum for rainfall. There's the landfall point, and then there's the mountain point.
Yes.
And Helene had the same thing. You had that spot in Florida with the rainfall maximum, but it's not like the storm is getting stronger. Again, it's the effective elevation. What it's doing is it's really squeezing out every last drop of rainfall. And my alarm bells are. I'm wondering what happened up in Ohio and Pennsylvania to intensify it a little bit more up there. I wonder if there was some trough digging in or some cold front up that way that kind of forced the issue a little bit more. Of course, you have elevation up there too, but there might have been some other forcing.
Yeah, I believe there might have been a stalled front or a trough it interacted with as it moved up there. Clearly, something up there that pushed it back to the southeast. So. That blocked its flow up there. But it's also a good idea to remind people that, these inland threats from hurricanes are a real deal. And it's usually freshwater flooding that is going to be the biggest impact. And we would hope, in this day and age, people inland know that hurricanes don't stop at the coast. One of the interesting subjects of conversation at the National Weather Association conference was how to communicate inland threats of tropical systems. And there was a little talk, Tim, and I think it's provocative, but I think it's very interesting, of stopping the cone at the coast and having some other type of graphic from the coast inland because of what happened with Helene and people focusing on where the center was and not where the impacts were going. So there was a lot of talk about having some kind of wide impact color-coded graphic inland and stopping the cone at the coast so that people would stop focusing on where the center was, which I thought was pretty interesting and probably, needed some more conversation, but it was kind of a working group of like, hey, how can we better communicate some of these inland impacts? And all these examples were pretty far up there. It sounds weird that we're talking about flooding, Tim, because one of the things we want to end with today is we have the complete opposite of that right now in the Carolinas. We need some rain, Tim, desperately. Not that we want to see flooding, but boy, it seems like it's an extreme. We get all or nothing. And tomorrow is Thursday. If I'm not familiar with Thursday is, that's when the drought monitor comes out. And Tim, your graphic clearly shows we had a big area of expansion of what we call abnormally dry conditions. That's D0. It's technically the lowest level of drought. It's kind of the precursor to D1, which is the beginning of moderate drought. But I am curious what your thoughts are on how much of an expansion we could see tomorrow and maybe even an upgrade to some D1 areas in the Carolinas.
Yeah, I would expect that. I think that's kind of, the expectation, I would say, going into tomorrow. At least we'll see more of the state added up into that area. You only need to go outside, and you can kind of tell just how dry it's been. ahead of a hurricane season, we don't know what kind of impact we're going to get. There are pros and cons to this. On the one hand, we really could use some rain. On the other hand, if we do unfortunately get a big system that could bring an enormous amount of rainfall, being a little abnormally dry going into that, it gives you a lot of capacity to absorb some water.
Yeah.
So there's pluses and minuses here. If you're in a fall foliage and a leaf color mindset, me too. And this might not be the best for fall color, right? Because we were talking about unusually early leaf drop. I think we're starting to see some of that going on, or maybe a little bit of drought stress. So every day that you continue to be a little dry, it adds to that. And so I think we'll see this expanded out, don't you, for tomorrow?
Yeah, especially because the impacts. And for folks that don't understand, the drought monitor, I think sometimes is one of the most I don't want to say confusing, but a lot of folks think it's just strictly rain because we have plenty of rain. How could we be in drought? The drought monitor is really an impact product, right? It's about what are the impacts? Are there water shortages? Are stream flows low? Is the soil moisture low? And really one of the biggest one is agricultural impacts. And as you mentioned, Tim, if farmers are having dry fields or they're having yield issues because of dry weather, that's going to raise the drought monitor. And something we've got to keep a close eye on, and this is something I am going to watch closely, we're getting into that secondary fire season here in the fall, the wildfire season.
Yep.
When the leaf drop starts to happen, you have a lot of fuels because the vegetation goes dormant, and it starts to get windy here in the Carolinas. So if we stay dry, we've got leaves, the normal dry vegetation in the fall, but we've got all this timber from Helene, which has now been sitting out for a year and is what we call seasoned. It's become dried firewood. So that's another impact we're going to have to watch carefully. I don't want to see a tropical system per se, Tim, but it'd be nice to get a nice little wedge maybe and some nice drizzly, misty weather for a couple days like we had in early August, which was kind of nice to kind of soak things a little bit without causing flooding. But tomorrow will be an interesting day, and I'm sure it'll be a big topic of our show tomorrow as we talk about this expansion of the drought. And as a homeowner and a lawn grower, this is frustrating because you're trying to overseed and aerate your lawn right now. And you want some moisture, but you don't want too much. It's like we're picky, because you don't want to wash your seed away. But this is a time of year people are trying to get their lawn to recover from the summer heat. And the last thing you want is a drought going into the fall.
It's true. That was the bummer with yesterday. We were hoping to maybe get up in my area about half an inch of rain. That was kind of the model consensus. We didn't get a drop, right?
Yeah.
So it's another swing and a miss with that low kind of moving a little north and east. We'll likely see that the dry weather problems just continue.
Yeah.
30 seconds to go in the show.
Yeah.
Where our runners are coming across the finish line at Carolina at the Charlotte Motor Speedway.
All right. Run through the line. Run through the line.
You gotta
go. Come on. Finish strong. I'm going to see someone do donuts now. Still burnout.
Confetti falls. Yeah, there you go. All right, well, that does it for our extended edition of Live Impact. Oh, Fluffy was the name of the three-headed monster, thanks to one of our
Fluffy,
viewers.
that's
who texted
right.
that in.
That was such a tranquil
Oh,
name.
good. Fluffy.
Yeah.
Ironic.
Was it Monster X? Was the Godzilla monster? I don't know. We'll think about it. But we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in tonight for our long version of Weather Impact.